Well, as you know, I spend a lot of time going to festivals and fairs, and I like to give a report now and again on the things I find in these environments. These are always short readings, maybe 15 minutes, maybe half an hour, so they're quite quick um, sessions, which is kind of quite challenging in a way because you have to really look at the hand and find the things in the hand that are kind of important and significant and really hone in on those. And one of the best places to look when you're doing that is to look at the fingerprint patterns, either on the end of the fingers or on the palms themselves, because they're easy to identify, they're relatively easy to see most of the time, and they are very, very significant characteristics of somebody's life. And so if you're talking about those things, then you're really getting to the nub of the issue really very quickly. Because of course the fingerprint patterns don't change, and being as they don't change over time, what that indicates is it's a kind of characteristic that's permanent throughout someone's life. So if you can identify with those things, then you can identify something which is going to be a constant within their life in an expression of who they are at a really very fundamental level. So let me just talk through some of the hands I saw and what I looked at and things I found, and I'll show you some interesting fingerprint patterns that I found when I was in Pukekohe. So this was in September 2025, a weekend in Pukekohe, which is a town just south of Auckland. And I think I did 13 hand readings over the 2 days. And there were various different kinds of people there that saw the hands of, and I'll tell you a little bit about them now. So I like to emphasize the fingerprint patterns, as I mentioned, because they are relatively easy to see. But I always make a note of how many fingerprint patterns the person has, and what kind of combinations of patterns we see in other parts of the hand as well. So, for example, um, we looked. The first handprint I did was Lalita and Sanjilia, who were basically had lots of whirls and lots of loops. Both of them had loops of sensitivity, which is a loop pattern you find in the lower part of the hand. Um, so there were quite a lot of words, but the common theme for this particular weekend was hyper bendy thumbs. So many people have really bendy thumbs. And I think on this day I saw about 4 or 5 people with bendy thumbs in this kind of way, which is kind of really um, sort of distinctive. And it's funny how that always happens. You get these kind of themes happening through the day. So I saw the hands of a counselor, someone who was studying for a psychology degree, a massage therapist and healer, an insurance, someone who worked in an insurance office. She obviously had lots of loops. Um, and she was Romanian actually, and she had a massive break in the major earth line, transforming herself from one part of the country to another. A business analyst with 10 arches and fire skin texture and a loop of serious intent. You get these kind of themes running through the hands in that kind of way. But one of the most interesting hands I saw was this one here. So I just want to show you some things that are kind of easy to see from the hand without looking at the fingerprint patterns. And you can see two things in this hand that are very distinctive and immediately apparent. One is how short the little finger is. So the little finger should come up to about this crease up here. And you can see that this little finger has is sunk down and has diminished into the palm like that. So what we've got here is what a short air finger. And if you look at the bottom, you can see how it's kind of dropping down there as well, so that the height of the ridges, so the lines between the phalanges on that finger are lined up more or less with that one there. It should be about here. So what we've got here is a dramatically dropped little finger, or what we call the short low set air finger. And the short low set air finger is a very characteristic formation in the hands of people who've had a very difficult relationship with their parents during childhood. And it depends on whether you're a boy or a girl. This is a woman's hand, so she had an absent father during her childhood, and it had a huge psychological impact on her in terms of her sense of self-confidence and her sense of self-worth. And you can see that's reflected in the short little finger like that. It is absolutely crippled her communication, her belief in herself, and that has a very powerful effect on the relationship she has, adult relationships and marital relationships and so on and so forth. So this is always a topic that's really important to discuss when you see this in the hand, the impact of the absence of the parent of the opposite sex or the beneficial influence of the parents of the opposite sex during childhood and the sort of legacy effects of that. But what you can see also, there's two other things which is interesting from upon a more psychological point of view. First of all, you can see her airline is really, really long. So the airline goes right across the hand here, and you can see it has a kind of it's kind of crossing the hand almost entirely. So this is an overlong airline, and this shows someone who is incredibly analytical, thinks an awful lot about things, assesses things in great detail, can get quite obsessive about things, and gets on hobby horses about things. This formation basically just creates that kind of intensity and drive intellectually to pursue particular kind of things. So we know that's about her temperament. I mean, it might also be that she may have some ADHD or some dyslexia or something like that as well. So then there's some neurodivergence going on in here. So the question always when you've got that kind of thing is, well, what are they obsessed about? What's the thing that they're interested in? And if we look at the fingerprint patterns, that's what tells us. So we look up here. You probably can't see it quite so clearly. It hasn't come out very well in the fingerprint in the photograph, but she's got a loop pattern on this on the index finger, which is relatively normal. We expect to see that. But what's significant is an arch on the middle finger. So the arch fingerprint pattern on the middle finger is particularly significant in the hands of people who are interested in law, politics, justice, anthropology, criminology, the legal system. When you've got an arch like that in that particular hand, it sort of emphasizes the importance of the middle finger. And the middle finger is to do with all those subjects that I just outlined. And she is an anti-government journalist. So she writes lots of articles and pieces investigating injustices committed by the New Zealand government, and she runs a commune, so she's really kind of very much against the system and she knows her constitutional law, and basically wants to fight the system as much as she can. So you've got that kind of someone who's really obsessed about that, by virtue of the long airline. And the motivation for that comes from this desire to see more justice in the world. We might speculate that this possibly she has a negative relationship with her father during her childhood, created an anti-authoritarian stance as well. That would be speculating, and in 15 minutes we don't really have enough time to explore the depths of the psychological reasons behind it. But you can see the interest and the motivation just from those features of the hand alone. So, you don't need to see all the details of the hand. But what you do need to do is pick out what are the most important, most significant features of the hand and hone in on those. All right, so another photograph of the same handprint. All right, so now this is another one. This is a debate that I'm having a lot with people in the hand reading world at the moment about the significance of knotty fingers. And you can see the fingers have long been thought to be an indicator of how someone thinks and how they communicate. And I really am not convinced that this is true. So if you go back through the history of hand reading, the notion about knotty fingers and smooth fingers was something that was developed by de Pontigny in 1839. So he's one of the founding fathers of Victorian palmistry, and he was looking at the shape and the form of the hand, particularly from the back of the hand, as we can see in this particular photograph. So he was looking at the backs of the hand and kind of trying to get an idea of what people were like by looking at those features. And so he didn't really pay much attention to the palm and didn't pay much attention to the lines, and he certainly didn't look at the fingerprint patterns. But one of the things he noticed that in his endeavors was that engineers and mechanics, he said, had knotty fingers, whereas artists and poets and musicians had smooth fingers. And so there's been this interminable debate since that time about what is actually meant by knotty fingers. And what is meant by that is fingers that are kind of quite bulging at the joints, or bulging around here and also bulging around here. And you can see how particularly these upper joints here, are actually really quite bulging. Except this is not an indication of knotty joints. This is an indication of someone who's got arthritis. So this is an older woman, probably in her 70s. I didn't make a note of her name. Um, but the fingers here being knotty is not an indication of intellectual deliberation, logical analysis, cautious thinking at all, in my view. It's simply this. It's simply a medical indication of arthritis. And we have to be able to see the medical facts, irrespective of palmistic interpretation of those things, because Well, because the palmistic interpretations are wrong, basically. So I don't teach knotty fingers and smooth fingers. I don't think it's an important part of hand reading. Like I don't teach about mounts. I think those are completely irrelevant. And I don't teach about fingertips. And fingertips, knottiness or smoothness of the finger joints and the mounts is actually the basis of all Western palmistry going dating from Victorian times and has had a profound effect upon Indian palmistry as well. So most of the palmistry out there will say, oh no, you've got to look at the mounts. Oh no, you've got to look at the fingertip shapes. Oh no, you need to see if the fingers are knotty or the fingers are smooth. No, you don't. Those things are all completely irrelevant. When you come to analyzing a hand, what's more important? And how do people even evaluate that? Ah, you're somebody who thinks in a logical and analytical way. How useful is that information? Compare that to, oh, your father was absent when you were a child and had a profound effect upon your psychological development and has an enormous impact upon your sexual relationship choices as an adult woman. That's a far more important thing. And verifiable too. That's either objectively true or it is not true, and that's easy for people to find out. People don't know how they think. Oh, yeah, maybe I think a bit analytically. Maybe I'm a quite logical person. Even if they are, you can actually see that more clearly by other things. For example, as we saw in this handprint, you can see how logical analytical someone is by looking at their airline. So a straight airline shows somebody who's logical and analytical. And this is somebody who's logical and analytical, irrespective of the fact that she doesn't have knotty fingers. So knotty fingers, don't care about knotty fingers. Anyway, this was a beautiful example of a hand with knotty fingers on it, which has got nothing to do with thinking and everything to do with arthritis. So that's got to be your first port of call. If you see knotty fingers in a hand, it's probably arthritis. All right, there's me waiting again, looking about, waiting for people to come. I can just want to talk about my book. You can see that's my book there coming out, The Palmistry of Fingerprint Patterns. This is my new book on fingerprints, which is coming out in January. You can already order the book, actually. It's available on Amazon.com. So you can pre-order it, so it'll get delivered to you at the beginning of February. Yeah, it's a thorough book exploring the significance of fingerprint patterns and the meaning of every fingerprint pattern on every finger. I wrote it about 35 years ago, so it's kind of been a secret book, really. Only a few people have had access to that, but now it's going to be publicly available. So go to Amazon.com and check it out. Get your order today. All right. So going back to some other fingerprint patterns. So this was an interesting hand reading. This was an interesting hand reading with a woman who basically claimed that she's a psychic and a medium. She gave me her card, and I looked up her website and stuff. She does what she calls soul evolution readings. She's a spiritual teacher and a Reiki teacher, a soul therapist, and does spiritual workshops. And I'm going, I didn't know that, of course, when I started reading a hand, but afterwards I went, well, what the fuck did you come to me for? Like, why are you going for a hand reading? If you're so wise and so insightful and so knowledgeable and so self-aware, why would you need to come for a hand reading? And the answer, of course, is she isn't insightful and knowledgeable and so on and so forth. I've got no idea what she's actually doing. But I know why she's doing it because she's got a tented arch fingerprint pattern on the index finger. So you can see I've drawn on it, which is what I always do when I'm in hand reading sessions with people. So let me just go around the ridges and then you can see quite clearly that it is in fact a tented arch. So we've got that one going up there like that. So what happens to the tented arch is we see that the ridges curve over the fingerprint like that. And if you look carefully, you'll see the sort of triangular formation coming into the middle of the fingerprint there. It's a bit hard to draw with a mouse sometimes, but there we go. Boink down to there, boink down to there like that. So that's basically the formation of what we call a tented arch. And this is the rarest fingerprint pattern of all. It only occurs on about 1% of all fingerprint patterns everywhere in the world. It really doesn't occur on very many fingerprint patterns at all. And when it is found, it usually only is found on the index finger. You don't normally see it anywhere else on the hand at all. Yes, you will find them occasionally, but it's so rare. It's extraordinarily rare on any other digit. But even on the ring on the index finger, it's actually also very rare because it only occurs on 1% of index fingers. And this woman has got the tented arch on both index fingers. So what does it mean? Well, the index finger is to do with your sense of identity. It shows your interest in psychology and spirituality, and it's your personal idealism, really. And what you find with people with tented arches on their index finger is they are incredibly idealistic. They kind of have a vision for the world, and they feel duty bound to try and spread the message about their vision, how they want the world to be, how they need to change the world to make it a better place. So they can be quite inspirational. They can be quite fanatical too, but they're kind of driving, thrusting themselves forward into what they're interested in doing. And this is kind of like the indication of that pattern as well. It's kind of like it's like a pattern that's thrusting up to the middle like that. So very strongly presenting itself that way. It's kind of like I think of it like as a kind of volcano, like a sort of exploding out of the top. You can sort of see that sort of notion of the magma coming up through the top of the mountain like that. And so that's kind of how they are in life. They kind of got this exuberance, this enthusiasm, this passion, this drive, this intensity, and they need a focus. That's the most important thing. If they don't have a focus, then what tends to happen is people with tented arches get very kind of dissipated and very distracted. So they need to have a focus where they can put their energy, and so they need to find their mission, and that's the key thing in life. Whatever it is, they need to find their mission. So I've seen plenty of examples of that. I'll give you some examples of that. So there's a guy I know who attended arts like that, who was a DJ, and he had his vision about how he could create a fantastic festival. And now, 6, 7 years later, he's running his own festival on an annual basis, and he's fulfilling his mission, he's fulfilling his dream, he's fulfilling his ideals. There's a guy I knew who had this, he's a vegan activist. Somebody else who's a pioneer with human design, and another woman who's psychic kind of woman who's doing light language. She's one of the forefront people at the forefront of the whole light language phenomena. So these people are often quite spiritually inclined because their vision includes a kind of notion of some kind of spiritual perspective on life, and so that's why this woman is doing what she's doing. So she's drawn to doing things like Reiki and healing. She wants to be a spiritual teacher. I don't know if she knows anything, but she's at least going in that direction, and that's clearly the right direction for her. So she wants to be an inspiration to others to lead a better life according to spiritual ideals. And that's kind of the vision that's shown by the tented arch is kind of what's kind of key with it, because it is like this rising up, this kind of creation of a thrusting up into the world to make one's life be fulfilled in that kind of way, to kind of aspire towards the higher goals, spiritual, mystical goals, if you like, of the personal of that person's personal idealism. So you don't know what their focus is. You never know what that is. You have to ask them. But if they say, "Oh, I don't have a mission," then you know what's important is you need to say, well, you need to find a mission because your life won't be fulfilled until you have a mission to fulfill. So that's the message to give to people with tented arches, and they can very often be leaders as well. You know, take a leadership role and be because they're pioneers, they're innovators, they are not afraid to go beyond the bounds and do something that kind of changes things. But it's always according to their own personal ideal, their vision, and their inspiration. That's her whole hand. Yes, you know, so she claims to be a spiritual teacher and a sort of psychic, I guess, kind of thing, but she doesn't have any of the hand features of a psychic that you'd normally expect to see. Double loop on the thumb, which is fairly typical, but so that maybe that's why she came for handing. She's a little bit of doubt. People with double loops on their thumbs are often doubting themselves and can't quite make up their mind because they're always seeing both sides of things. Hey, look, another short low set air finger. We didn't go into that, I don't think. Um, Yeah, but there is. Look at that. You can see again, very short low-set air finger. The air finger's not coming up to the crease here. It's down here like that. So yeah, we got the same problem with the absent father during childhood. And similar to the other woman actually, again, we've got this really long airline that's coming across the hand. So we've probably got some kind of ADHD or neurodivergence going on. But I just want to point out one more thing about this airline, which I think is really important. I don't know if you can see clearly. I'm going to draw on it so you can see it more clearly. But the airline starts kind of quite. I'm not going to draw the mess here, but it kind of starts quite tied here, and it comes across there, and then you can see there's a branch of it that comes out here. like there. Boom. But there's also a branch that comes out here as well. And that one's tending to go to the waterline. And what you've got there is a discontinuity in the line. So it's actually broken there. So this is probably what she's experiencing herself is a kind of psychological dissociation or fragmentation. So it's a really long airline. But when you see airlines that change direction like that, it could either be a significant factor in someone's like a psychological breakdown or a religious conversion experience, or the way they often talk about it is they say, well, I hear voices or I can hear people talking to me or I'm channeling. So it has an association with this kind of channeling. Really, what it is, it's a fragmented identity or a fragmented cognitive thought stream. So I don't really know how much intellectual clarity or cognitive perspicacity this woman has, but she will articulate it like, oh, hear voices, I hear things, people talking to me, I get channeled messages, might be something what she's saying when I'm doing my soul evolution. It's not me, but I get messages from my guides. And that's a kind of typical way that people with this kind of fragmented personality will articulate their experience. It's almost like they feel like there's a voice inside their head, which is just them. So it's like, yes, it's you can talk about that as if it's some kind of ascended master or guide or whatever, but actually, if it's in your head, it's in your head. It's not in some kind of transcendent realm out there. It's inside you. And you see this kind of formation where the line breaks or has a secondary part that's higher up than the other one, as a kind of feature of that. And as I say, she doesn't have the typical um, hand features that I'd expect to see with people who are actually clairvoyant or clairaudient or clairsentient. I mean, she's got a bit of a minor airline, but it's not clearly well formed, and she has no lupus sensitivity. So the two kind of features of the hand um, that you'd expect to see in the hands with definite clairvoyant and clairaudient ability she doesn't have. She has more of a fragmented personality that she's relating to as if she's getting sort of wise messages from people. I just want to point out that, kind of if you can see it as well, but there's sort of can you see the sort of discoloration on the hand? There's a sort of rouging to the hand. I don't like it when I see that kind of rouging discoloration on the palm like that. That's a kind of that's an effect of alcohol, that is basically. So she likes her drink, I'm sure of it. She's got good reasons to, she's had quite a lot of trauma in her life, obviously. That's kind of quite clear from the hand too, particularly, of course, that short laser air finger. But at least she's found her path, found her direction, found her mission in life. And that's always the kind of key thing when you've got a tented arch on the hand. All right, so this is a guy's hand. Now, that's unusual. Not many guys come for hand readings, so it's quite unusual when you see one. And what's always interesting about the guys when they come for hand readings, they don't say anything. They just sit there and they just listen and they expect you to tell them everything and they don't want to give anything away. But that's because often they're really earthy. And I hope you can see that this is an earth hand shape. He was a really, really big guy. He was huge. And whoops, not that, do that way. Let's do that one down there. So you can see there's a really nice square palm. And then we got short fingers in relationship to the palm. So this is an earth hand shape, um, which is another reason why he didn't say anything. And I like taking photographs of the earth hand shapes, and because you don't see them very often, and it's nice to have that opportunity. But what you get when you see an earth hand shape is typically you'll get a fire skin texture. Sometimes you get an earth skin texture, but typically you'll get a fire skin texture. You won't be able to see that from the photograph, but you have to palpate the ridges, and you can actually, when you palpate the ridges, you can see how rough they are. And then, of course, you get these relatively clear hands with very few lines on them. So what you've got in this hand is just the major lines. Okay, there, the major airline going to there. And the air and the water line, of course, as usual, are quite short, but the major earth line is really long. Um, so this is a very robust, physically strong person, physically active, doing work that requires physical effort on his part. And he's basically he runs a goods transport business. He basically is delivering materials, goods. And he's got a small fleet of lorries. I think he said about 8 or 9 people working for him. So he runs his own business, basically transporting stuff, and that's an absolutely classic earthy, fiery job. And he's got whirls on his index finger. So there you go, whirl on the fire finger, whirl on the index finger. So he basically wants to work for himself. He wants to be his own boss. So he can't really work for anybody else. So he has to work for himself. So when you get that kind of formation, you got a self-employed business person. Really, he does love his work. He has to be his work has to be enjoyable. Um, but you can see from the hand that he's quite a simple kind of guy. There's nothing complicated going on. He doesn't analyze things too deeply. He keeps his feelings to himself. He doesn't give anything away. Absolutely classic indication of that when you have the waterline missing in this section between going up to the finger. There's nothing there at all. His emotions, his feelings, his connection with people is really quite restricted. He keeps himself to himself. Doesn't say much. Doesn't open up. Um, but there's not a profundity to the depth of his understanding about things either. He's got a very practical, level-headed approach to life. It's very straight, logical, airline. It doesn't think too deeply about things, but he focuses on the task at hand. Very practically orientated, practically driven. And of course, his earth line is very, very strong because he's physically very healthy and physically very strong too. So, and I thought the air finger was quite big. So like the air finger being big like that, kind of like is a good indication of his kind of business skills as well. It doesn't look like this from the photograph, but his water finger is long. And it's bent to the earth finger as well. So he's got some very strong traditional religious upbringing in his background. He's a Sikh, as I recall. So that's an important point to note. So you get that kind of high degree of conformity when you get the water finger bent towards the earth finger. But essentially, he wants to do his own thing and run his own business, and he is. And his own business is transporting, moving, i.e., the fire element, material, goods, so earth. So he's doing an absolutely brilliant job in his life of making his life live in accordance with his chirological determinants. All right, there was one more fingerprint that I saw on the weekend, which I think is a really, really interesting one to show you. And it's this one. So I'm going to zoom right into it so you can see it really clearly. This is what they call a lateral pocket loop. Well, that's a bit of a mouthful, that name, but a lateral pocket loop is a pattern that is a loop pattern coming in from the side like this, but instead of lying out there, it falls over like that. So sometimes it's called a falling loop. So you can see the pattern goes around there like that. And if you look very carefully, you'll see there's actually another little loop underneath it. So the lateral pocket loop is the formation on the hand where you get a loop pattern which has a secondary loop underneath it. And it's a really, really, really rare pattern. So according to statistics from Scotland Yard, the police department in the United Kingdom, this pattern only occurs on 0.154% of fingerprint patterns. So less than 0.02% of fingerprint patterns are lateral pocket loops. So they're incredibly rare. So hand readers get very excited when they see them because it's like finding a rare butterfly or something like that. It's a particularly unusual thing. What does it mean? Well, we don't really know. We don't really know because we don't see them very often. So it's really hard to kind of work out an interpretation of their significance. The way to do that, as is always the case when you've got to find something in the hand that you don't know, is you try and work from first principles. So this is on the left hand. It's on the index finger. And whenever you're going to get these kind of variant fingerprint patterns, like they will always be on the index finger. You can see very clearly the little loop underneath there, and then the bigger loop going up and over the top like that. Essentially, because it's on the index finger of her right hand, this is effectively a radial loop. So it's a radial loop. So it's open to the external half. To basically treat it exactly as you would describe a radial loop. You might find the potency and the significance of that pattern is much more powerful in the case of this particular variation, if you like, of the radial loop, because there's two loops, there's not just the one. So that's a kind of important consideration as well, is like it kind of magnifies the sort of chameleonic effect of the radiologist taking on board things outside of themselves. Um, yeah, so that's always a good conversation to have with people when you see the lateral pocket loop. Now, the woman who had this was also incredibly sensitive in other ways. She had a loop of sensitivity in the palm as well, so she would have been incredibly tuned in and receptive to other people and the people and the situations and circumstances around her. But that's also true for the lateral pocket loop as well. You're going to get this because it's basically because it's a variation of a radial loop. And essentially what that is like the the external world, the influence of other people, the opinions of other people, the expectation of other people come in, and they're overwhelming. If you look at this as a wave, if you imagine you're on a beach and you see a wave doing that, this is a wave that's not just peaking, this is a wave that's crashing over. So it's kind of a wave that's kind of falling down. So it's more overwhelming than your standard radial loop, and a standard radial loop is pretty overwhelming in and of itself. So take your time with this pattern if you see it in people's hands, because it needs a little bit of care and attention to be clear about what that signifies in terms of that person's life. So while we're here, I'll just talk a little bit about my book, which is coming out. I mentioned earlier, it's available from Amazon.com. It's called The Palmistry of Fingerprint Patterns. It's all about the significance of the fingerprint patterns and what they mean. And I'll just give you a quick guide of the content. So it kind of gives a brief overview of the history of handreading, the history of fingerprint discoveries, the scientific and anthropological significance of fingerprint patterns, including how to classify them. That's a kind of really kind of key thing. How do you work out what fingerprint patterns are? And then from there, I go into the significance of the fingerprint patterns from a psychological point of view. And I go through the significance of every single fingerprint pattern on every single finger. And there are seven main types of fingerprint patterns, or obviously five digits. So that's a kind of combination of about 35 manifestations of the fingerprint patterns on the fingers. But they're not just on the fingers, they're also in the palm as well. And then I look at the medical and physiological significance of the fingerprint patterns as has been discovered by medical science. So this is kind of like a comprehensive book looking at the significance of the fingerprint patterns in the hand. So the seven main fingerprint patterns are quite clearly indicated. In the palm, so they're quite easily described. We've been talking about some of those in this presentation today. Um, and I go through the meaning of the fingers and the fingerprints, as I said, and the palm hieroglyphics too. So in addition to the palm, the ones on your fingers, you have a whole array of different fingerprint patterns that occur between the fingers and the palm, and I give the statistical distributions of those as well, so you can see how common or rare they are and what they all mean. Whether you've got a hyperthenile whirl or a loop of sensitivity or a loop of mystery, an arch of depression or a loop of playfulness, they will have very specific associations with human experience. More importantly, perhaps, is the medical dermatoglyphic discoveries. The genetic material studying the fingerprints done by scientists is really important and provides a very good basis for understanding of what the fingerprints signify. But they're not just genetic, they're also a description of kind of like our life path and our karmic sort of destinies and patterns and things too. So to understand that, you need to understand how the fingerprint patterns, how common they are on different fingers. You need to understand how the fingerprints are formed. The fingerprint form in the womb at by 16 weeks of gestation. So I've included the references to that as well as the statistical distributions of fingerprint patterns as shown by Scotland Yard surveys of over 2 million fingerprint patterns. So we've got a really good basis for what we are saying about the different kind of things. And for a bit of fun, I've also included an analysis of the fingerprints of some famous people, including Jimi Hendrix, John Lennon, and Malcolm X. So we have their fingerprint records because they were all taken by the FBI. Jimi Hendrix was in the army, so he's in the FBI. John Lennon had to submit his fingerprint patterns to become an American citizen. And Malcolm X, I think he did some prison time. So they're all in the system. The book has basically been around for 30 years, and it's a lot of my students have used it over the last 35 years and have become professional hand readers as a result. And if you want to learn more about hand reading, you can pre-order your copy from the book from Amazon.com at this website address below. And if you want to find out more about me and learn more about hand reading, you can come and join me at any one of those locations there. My website, handreading.nz, my my or the handreadinginternational.com website if you want to find about how to become a professional hand reader. So, okay, so that's my little presentation about my experiences reading hands in Pukekohe in Auckland. And next up will be not Whangamata, no, somewhere Whangarei up in the north of New Zealand. And I'll keep you updated about the very interesting things that I find. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and it makes a big difference to me. And you will then get all the notifications of when new videos come out.